My sister moved her housewarming to the day of my daughter's funeral, and called it a minor event. If that sentence shocked you, if it made your stomach turn, then you're not alone. Because that day didn't just bury my child, it buried any illusion I had left about what family really means. Heartbreak. Before I begin, please, if you've ever been betrayed by someone who was supposed to stand by you, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment sharing your story. You're not alone, and neither was I not anymore. My name is Claire Dawson. I'm 38 years old, and I've lived my whole life on the Oregon coast, a quiet, gray place where storms roll in off the sea, and most people keep to themselves. I work as a hospice nurse. I hold the hands of strangers as they take their last breath. I've been called strong, calm, composed, the type of woman who never makes a fuss. But I wasn't strong the day my daughter died. Her name was Lily, 10 years old, my entire world. One morning she was chasing the cat around the kitchen, laughing in her socks, and by nightfall, I was in a hospital hallway, trying to understand how a seizure could turn into something that stole her from me in just weeks. Grief has a sound. It's the silence after a child's laugh disappears from your home. When I chose the date for Lily's funeral, the second Saturday of the month, I picked it because it was the only time the little white chapel near the cliffs was available. The same one where Lily was baptized as a baby. I didn't think anyone would question it, least of all my own sister. Her name is Megan. We grew up in the same house but in very different worlds. Megan's always been polished, loud, demanding. She's the kind of person who calls attention to herself without ever seeming to ask for it. The golden child. I was the quiet one. The helper. The one who made things easier. So when Megan called me 4 days after Lily passed, I assumed she was finally reaching out to offer comfort. But instead, I got this. Claire, I need to talk to you about the 12th. That's the day of my housewarming. My breath caught. That's Lily's funeral. She sighed. I know, but I've had this on the calendar for months. The catering's booked. The florist. The guest list's over 50 people. I can't cancel. I thought maybe she was confused. That grief had made her temporarily insane. But then she said the words I will never, ever forget. Claire, Lily's gone. You need to stop making a minor event into something dramatic. People die. Life moves on. I didn't cry. Not right then. I went numb. Like the part of me that still believed in Megan, in family, just shut off like a switch. That night I sat in Lily's room, holding her favorite blanket. It still smelled like her shampoo. I stared at the wall and tried to understand how any sister, any mother, could look at her sibling's pain and decide her new backsplash was more important than a child's goodbye. I called our mother the next morning. She listened, paused, then said softly, "Maybe this is just Megan's way of coping." Coping. That word echoed in my ears like a curse. Because I was barely breathing, and my family thought this was normal. But the real blow hadn't landed yet. Because what I didn't know, what would make my stomach turn weeks later, was that Megan hadn't just scheduled her party on Lily's funeral day by accident. She had done it on purpose. And my own mother would choose quiche and champagne over saying goodbye to her only granddaughter. The day of Lily's funeral began with fog. Thick, white mist rolled in off the sea, clinging to the windows of the chapel like breath. It was the kind of morning Lily used to love. She'd say it looked like the world was wrapped in cotton. I stood in the front pew, hands folded, numb from the inside out. The tiny casket rested beneath the stained glass window where sunlight would have shone, if the sun had bothered to come out. Maybe it didn't feel like watching, either. People filtered in slowly, neighbors, a few of Lily's classmates, holding flowers too big for their hands. My coworkers from hospice came. Even some of the families I'd helped through their own losses. Faces I hadn't seen in years came to hug me, hold my hand, cry beside me. But 2 faces were missing. Megan's, and our mother's. I kept glancing toward the entrance, expecting, hoping, to see them rush in late. Out of breath, embarrassed, but the doors never opened for them. At one point, I heard the church doors creak behind me, and I turned around with my heart in my throat. It was just a stranger from the neighborhood, walking in with a raincoat and a thermos. I don't remember the service. Just moments. The pastor's voice. Kind but distant. The slideshow of photos I'd pieced together at 2 in the morning. Sobbing over Lily's baby pictures. The way her favorite song, "You Are My Sunshine," echoed through the chapel and made everyone weep. Even the ones who didn't know her well. But I didn't cry. Not once. Not until I got back into the car. That's when I saw it, on my phone. Buzzing silently in the cup holder. A message from a mutual friend. Can't believe Megan's party is today. The place looks incredible. Full house. Crazy timing. Huh? Attached was a photo. Megan standing in front of her brand new kitchen island. Beaming. Wearing a champagne-colored jumpsuit and heels. Our mother beside her. Holding a wine glass. Smiling. My hands shook. But not from sadness. From rage. The kind of rage that makes your body hum. That makes your teeth press together until your jaw aches. That makes you realize just how many years you've been swallowing your feelings in silence. They hadn't just skipped Lily's funeral. They were celebrating. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't some careless mistake. This wasn't just Megan being clueless or insensitive. She had chosen this. Planned it. I remembered what she'd said on the phone. I've had this planned for months. Lily had been alive months ago. Megan had picked that date knowing full well what it would be used for. The chapel had been reserved 2 weeks earlier. She had booked her caterer after I sent out the funeral details. This wasn't coincidence. This was war. And my mother? She hadn't even sent a text. I didn't go home right away. I sat in the parking lot behind the chapel with the engine running and Lily's stuffed giraffe in my lap. The quiet was deafening. I thought about every time I'd made excuses for them. Every time Megan had ignored my birthday or shown up hours late for Christmas dinner. Every time our mother had told me to be the bigger person, when Megan made passive jabs about my small house or secondhand clothes. They had never seen me. Not really. They'd seen what I could offer. Help with moving, babysitting their kids, last-minute airport pickups, meals when they were sick, silent support. But when I needed them, truly needed them, they vanished like mist in the sun. Later that night, as the fog lifted and the air turned cold, I made a decision I hadn't even known I was capable of. I wasn't going to let them bury me along with my child. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in Lily's bed instead, curled up where she used to read her books, and listened to the house groan and settle with the cold. Her lamp was still on. I hadn't had the heart to turn it off since she passed. I didn't want the room to forget her. I didn't want to forget how it felt to tuck her in. My phone lit up sometime around 2 a.m. Another message from the same friend who'd sent the picture. Did you really not invite Megan? She's telling people you excluded her. Said you didn't want the funeral to feel like a scene. I sat up, heart pounding. She was rewriting it. The story. My grief. And worse. She was dragging me through the mud at her own party. While people ate shrimp cocktails and admired her fireplace. She was painting herself the victim. That's when I remembered the way she'd always done that. Twisted moments to make herself seem reasonable. I was always too sensitive. Too serious. When I got into nursing school, she called it cute. When Lily was born and I couldn't afford a proper nursery, Megan gave me her old bassinet and said, "At least now you'll feel a little less overwhelmed." And now, she was turning my daughter's funeral into a petty misunderstanding. A personal attack. A reason to gossip over wine. I wanted to scream. But instead, I sat there, frozen, staring at the nightlight Lily used to love, the one that glowed soft and blue like the ocean. Something hardened in me then. Not anger, not bitterness. Clarity. I had spent my life giving. Not because I wanted to be noticed, but because I thought if I just kept loving hard enough, maybe someday they'd meet me in the middle. Maybe they'd look at me and see someone worth showing up for. But that day had come and gone. And they hadn't come. So the next morning, I got dressed. I didn't brush my hair. I didn't put on makeup. I wore black slacks and Lily's favorite cardigan, the one she used to steal off my chair and wrap around her when she was cold. Then I got in my car. And I drove. Megan's house sat at the edge of a new development. All beige siding and stone driveways. I could see the string lights from down the block, still twinkling from last night's party. Cars lined the curb. Music drifted faintly through the open front door. I pulled up, parked in front, and sat there for a moment with the engine running. I wasn't sure what I was going to say. I just knew I had to say something. Not for revenge, not to make a scene, but because silence had taken enough from me already. When I stepped inside, the warmth of the house hit me like a slap. The smell of citrus candles, fresh paint, and wine. Laughter spilled from the kitchen. Megan stood near the island, in a crisp white blouse, chatting with someone who wore a pearl necklace and held a glass of rosé. She looked up and saw me. For a moment, her face twitched. Surprise? Guilt? It passed quickly. Claire, she said, her voice tight. What are you doing here? I didn't answer her. I stepped into the center of the room, surrounded by polished wood floors and the sound of forks on porcelain. The music dimmed, conversations tapered off, and then, in the quiet, I said, today, while you were celebrating countertops and crown molding, I buried my child. No one moved, no one spoke. I looked at Megan, really looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't shrink beneath her gaze. I turned, walked out the door, and left the light and the laughter behind. I didn't cry until I was halfway down the highway. And when I did, it was the kind of cry that comes not from heartbreak, but from finally letting go of something that's been rotting inside you for too long. Something broke that day, but it wasn't me. It was the illusion that these people, this family, had ever truly been mine. I didn't tell anyone where I was going after I left Megan's house. I just drove, past the cliffs, past the grocery store I used to take Lily to when we wanted to sneak chocolate milk. Past the school she would have started middle grade at next fall. I found myself at the beach, our beach, the one with the driftwood logs that looked like broken bones and tide pools that glowed when the sun hit them just right. It was nearly empty, just a couple of gulls, the endless gray sea, and the sharp, salty wind. I slipped off my shoes and stepped into the sand. The cold bit at my toes. I walked until the waves reached me. And then I just stood there, breathing, letting the ocean roar in and out of me. Lily loved this place. She'd make mermaid shapes in the sand, collect broken shells like treasure. Once, she asked if she could sleep out there, just one night, wrapped in the sound of waves. I said no, of course. I was always the practical one. But now, standing there with nothing but sky and sorrow around me, I wished I had let her. I sat down on the log we used to share and pulled her cardigan tighter around my body. My hands found the worn spot on the sleeve where her fingers had tugged and twisted when she was nervous. That little patch of fabric felt more like her than anything I had left. Grief is strange. It doesn't follow rules. One moment you're furious, the next you're hollow, and then, in the quiet, it speaks, not in words, but in realizations. And what it told me there on that shore was simple. I couldn't go back, not to the version of me that begged for scraps of affection. Not to the woman who gave and never asked why the people closest to her never gave back. I thought of my mother, her absence, her silence, and then the picture of her, smiling beside Megan, wine glass raised like it was any other Saturday. She had made her choice, and I was about to make mine. I didn't call her. I didn't write a letter. Instead, I drove home, walked into the house, and started packing. Not my things, just the ones that belonged to Lily. I wasn't getting rid of them. I was preserving them, folding her clothes carefully into boxes, labeling each one by memory. First day of school dress. Favorite pajamas. Stuffed animals, used for tea parties. It wasn't for closure. It was for protection. I wanted to keep her safe from the rot that had begun to rise around me. From the falseness of people who used love as decoration instead of foundation. By the end of the week, I'd made arrangements. Quiet ones. A few trusted friends from the hospice helped me. They offered food, soft hands on my shoulder. Real kindness. Not the kind that looks good in photos. I asked them to be my witnesses when I sat down and wrote my final words to my family. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but because I needed it said. Megan, I saw you, at your party, laughing, while I stood in a church and laid my child to rest. You chose that date, knowing what it meant. You told the world I excluded you. But what you did was far worse. You made my daughter's death about you. Don't reach out. Don't explain. I finally understand who you are. I sent a shorter note to my mother. You were the first person to hold Lily after she was born. And you chose to miss her funeral. I won't ask why. I no longer need to. That was the last time I contacted either of them. I blocked their numbers. I deleted the photos that weren't real memories, just posed smiles hiding years of imbalance. I didn't make a scene. I didn't post anything online. I just stepped out of the shadow. Finally, I'd thought losing Lily would destroy me. But in a strange, painful way, it revealed something, the truth about who I was, and who I no longer had to be. After I sent those letters, I waited, not because I expected an apology, but because part of me wanted to be proven wrong. I think that's what grief does, it makes you reach for something. Anything, to soften the blow, even if it's just a sentence. Even if it's too late. But the days passed, and there was nothing, not a call, not a knock at the door, not even a cold, defensive message. They were quiet, and the silence, somehow, felt worse than a fight. In that stillness, the memories crept in. I remembered my 6th birthday, when Megan got a new bike and threw a tantrum because I wouldn't let her ride mine. I ended up apologizing. I remembered my college graduation, when she showed up an hour late and rolled her eyes during the speech. And I remembered the day I told our mother I was pregnant with Lily, and she said, "Well, just make sure it doesn't slow down your work." All those moments I'd filed away as minor stings. Like mosquito bites you swat it and forget. They came back with a venom I'd never really faced. They weren't small. They were clues. Warnings I'd ignored for most of my life. I think what shocked me most wasn't Megan's cruelty or my mother's absence. It was how long I'd let it happen. How deeply I believed that if I just kept being good, kept being easy, they would finally love me in the way I needed. But love, I was starting to realize, isn't something you earn by suffering quietly. A few weeks after the funeral, I began to feel the air shift. Not outside, it was still cold and damp, as coastal Oregon always is, but inside me. I stopped sleeping in Lily's bed. I started making tea in the mornings again. I even opened the windows for the first time since the hospital. Letting the salt air in. It didn't make the grief disappear, but it made the house feel less like a tomb. One morning, I walked down to the mailbox barefoot, robe flapping in the breeze, hair still wet from the shower. There was a letter, handwritten, unfamiliar. I stood on the porch and opened it. It was from Lily's old art teacher. "Claire, I don't know if you remember me, but Lily was in my class for 3 years. She was bright, not just smart, bright. She used to stay after class and help me clean up. We talked about colors, how blue could be soft or sad or strong depending on the day. She once said, my mom's favorite color is blue because it reminds her of the ocean. And the ocean never asks for anything, it just keeps giving. I wanted you to know she saw you. Even when others didn't. Ms. Turner." I pressed the letter to my chest. I didn't cry, not right away. I just stood there on the porch, looking out at the gray horizon, and let the truth of it settle into me. Lily had seen me. For all the times I'd felt invisible, overlooked, small, she hadn't missed me. Not once. She'd understood more in 10 years than some people do in a lifetime. And somehow, knowing that helped me breathe again. I started going back to work part-time. Hospice care isn't something you ease into easily. Not when your own heart feels like it's still in pieces. But the patients, my patients, reminded me of something essential. That even in the end, kindness matters, being present matters, sitting beside someone in silence while they weep, or listen to their favorite song one last time, those small acts are everything. I didn't talk about Megan. I didn't explain to anyone why my mother no longer visited. I just let those ties loosen and fall away on their own. There's a kind of peace in that. A quiet release. Like unclenching your jaw after holding it tight for years. I started to think of my life in 2 parts, before the funeral. And after. Not because Lily was gone. She'd never really be gone. But because everything I thought I needed from my family had been burned to the ground. And all that was left was something simpler. Something more honest. The freedom to decide who I was without them. Spring came late that year. The kind that doesn't announce itself with color or celebration. but sneaks in, soft winds. Slower mornings. A few green blades poking through the earth like they're not sure they belong yet. I began spending more time outside. Nothing dramatic. Just walks to the market. Visits to the old bookstore where Lily used to beg for puzzle books. I started bringing my own tote again instead of using the paper bags. A small act that made me feel like someone coming back into her body. One morning, I saw a little girl crouched near the curb, trying to rescue a worm from a puddle. She had the same narrow shoulders as Lily. The same focused expression. For a moment, I stopped walking. My throat tightened. I just stood there, watching. She looked up at me and smiled. He was drowning, she said. I smiled back. You saved him. Her mother called her, and she ran off. I stayed there another minute, thinking how much Lily would have loved her. Then I kept walking. That's what grief is. Not something you overcome. Something you learn to carry. A few days later, I received an email from a local nonprofit I'd worked with in the past. They were opening a grief support group for children, kids who'd lost parents, siblings, even friends. They asked if I'd be willing to volunteer, maybe lead one of the sessions. At first, I stared at the screen for a long time. I wasn't sure I was strong enough to sit in a room full of small voices and enormous losses. But then I thought about Lily's teacher. About the note. About how even in her own grief, she reached out to say, I saw you. And I realized that maybe that's all any of us really need. To be seen. Especially when we're hurting. So I said yes. The group met on Tuesday afternoons in the basement of a community center. The kids sat in a circle on beanbags. Some silent, some crying, others fidgeting with rubber toys in their hands. They looked so much like Lily's friends. One girl had her same gap-toothed smile. One boy told a joke Lily would have laughed at. I didn't speak much that first session. I just listened, let them fill the room with what they needed to say. There was a kind of holiness in it, watching children make room for each other's pain without judgment. Afterward, one boy came up to me. Was it your kid who died? I nodded. He looked at me carefully. Did it hurt a lot? I paused. It still does, but not in the same way. He nodded, then slipped a drawing into my hand before running off. It was a picture of a heart with a crack in the middle, and tiny stitches drawn across it. Some things don't need words. I left that day feeling something I hadn't felt in months, connected. It was strange how, after all the noise and drama and betrayal, it was these children, who had lost so much of their own, who gave me back the pieces of myself I thought I'd buried with Lily. That night, as I made tea in the kitchen, I saw Megan's name flash across my phone screen. It was a text, just a few lines. Heard you've been talking about me. Thought we were past this. If you want to move on, maybe stop acting like the victim. I stared at it for a moment. Then I deleted it without reading the rest. There was nothing in her words that could touch me anymore. No sharpness. No sting. She was still living in the version of the world where I played the quiet, convenient role she needed me to fill. But I wasn't in that world anymore. I wasn't the person who stayed silent. I was someone else now, someone whose grief had carved her hollow. Then slowly, tenderly, helped her find new space. Space not for more pain, but for truth. For peace. For freedom. The first time I laughed after Lily died, it startled me. It wasn't loud or long. Just a small sound, barely there, but it came from my chest like something unexpected waking up. It happened during one of the group sessions, when a boy named Mason made a face while describing his dad's terrible singing. The other kids burst out. And I felt it too, that moment where grief made room for something else. And afterward, I sat in my car for a long time, just staring at the steering wheel. Because I hadn't expected to feel light again. Not ever. Not even for a second. I thought about telling someone. But I realized there wasn't anyone I wanted to tell. Not Megan. Not my mother. Not anyone from that old circle of holiday texts and performative sympathy. They didn't know this version of me. The one who had laughed through tears and sat in silence with wounded children and felt more understood than she ever had at a family dinner table. Some losses shrink your world. Others make you rebuild it from scratch. And when you start from nothing, you get to choose what's worth carrying. A few months later, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Megan's. I opened it slowly, like it might burn. Claire, I know you hate me. Maybe I deserve that. Maybe not. I didn't know how to be around your grief. I didn't want it to ruin everything I had worked so hard for. I didn't think it would matter that much. I didn't think you'd hold onto it this long. But I miss you. And I miss Lily. Can we talk? Megan. I read it twice. Then a third time. I sat with it in my lap for nearly an hour, staring out the window at the sky changing colors. It wasn't an apology. Not really. She didn't say she was wrong. She said she didn't think it would matter that much. She didn't admit what she did, only that she missed what she lost. And I realized something then. The person she missed wasn't me. She missed the version of me who stayed quiet, who smoothed things over, who swallowed her pain to keep the family peace. She didn't want me back. She wanted the old script to keep running. And I was done with that. I folded the letter back up and slid it into a drawer, not to keep. Not to revisit, but to put it somewhere where it couldn't follow me. Where her words couldn't keep tugging at the old parts of me that once would have responded. Even with just, okay, I no longer needed closure. I had chosen my own. I marked the 1-year anniversary of Lily's passing alone. But not lonely. I went back to the beach. The tide was low, the clouds thin. I brought a thermos of cocoa and one of Lily's books, her favorite one. About a girl who talked to foxes and traveled across the stars. I sat on the same driftwood log where we used to rest after digging holes and building castles. I read out loud to the sea. I told her I missed her. I told her I was okay. And then I said the thing I hadn't been able to say for so long. I forgive you for leaving. I cried. Quietly. Openly. The kind of crying that feels like breathing. Like healing. Then I got up, brushed the sand from my coat, and walked back home. The wind was behind me. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was carrying a shadow. I felt light, not because the grief was gone, but because I was no longer dragging the weight of people who refused to carry any of it with me. It's been almost 2 years now. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Other days, it feels like a dream someone else told me about. The house is quiet, but not heavy like it once was. The silence isn't grief anymore, it's peace. A different kind, one that I earned inch by inch. There's still a shelf in the corner of the living room filled with Lily's books and drawings. I didn't pack those away. I didn't feel the need. They belong here, like sunlight through the curtains or the way the kettle whistles just before it boils. I talk to her sometimes. Not out loud, but in the little moments, when I see a robin on the fence. Or when the breeze smells like the shampoo she used to borrow from me. She's not gone in the way people think. She's just, not here. Not in the way I want. But I carry her with me. What I don't carry anymore is guilt. Not for saying goodbye to people who chose not to stand beside me. Not for closing the door on a family that confused presence with performance. For a long time, I believed that keeping the peace meant absorbing the pain. That if I just tried harder, smiled more, asked for less, my love would eventually be returned in kind. But love that demands silence isn't love. It's convenience. And when I finally let that truth in, the shame fell away. What replaced it wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. That simple, quiet kind of knowing that lives deep in the bones. I no longer need an apology that will never come. I don't need them to understand what they cost me. They already showed me who they are. And I've finally shown myself who I can be without them. I still volunteer with the children's grief group. We meet every Tuesday. There's a girl named Ava who reminds me of Lily, brilliant, stubborn, full of stories that tumble out too fast for her own breath to keep up. She told me once, "Grown-ups don't cry right." I asked what she meant. And she said, "They try to hide it. Like it's bad. But it's just water from your heart. Water from your heart." I wrote it down that night. It felt true. Sometimes, I sit in the back of the meeting room after the kids leave, listening to the echo of their laughter. Their hard truths. They cry openly, then eat cookies and talk about cartoons. They carry their grief like kids carry backpacks, too big, a little crooked, but they keep walking. And so do I. Some days, I catch myself humming Lily's favorite song. I water the little garden we started together and whisper updates she would have cared about. I live simply, honestly, with room for quiet joy. Not long ago, I ran into someone who used to know my family. She asked, carefully, if I'd seen Megan. I told her no. She frowned. You just stopped speaking to your sister? I smiled. No. I stopped letting her speak over me. She didn't understand, but that was all right. This life I live now, it's not loud. It's not showy, but it's mine. It's built from real moments. Not hollow obligations. I choose the people I let close. I choose peace, even when it means being alone. I choose to honor the memory of my daughter not with bitterness, but with a life that feels true. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Sometimes family isn't who raised you. It's who stands beside you when the house is on fire and your heart is in ashes. Sometimes, love begins the moment you finally stop begging for it. And sometimes, healing starts not with a hug or an apology, but with a single, quiet act, walking away, and never looking back.